Welcome to Agile to Agility podcast with Milan Bajic.
Major show alert!
The very first value we wrote is individuals and interactions.
Let's take this to another level.
I'm a firm believer that we don't need more certifications and frameworks and things like that. What we probably need is more empathy and sharing and networking and understanding and helping other people.
So let's start with who is Christopher Stone?
Christopher Stone. So Christopher Stone is also known as the virtual agile coach, someone who firmly believes in the power of remote working. And I've been involved in agile ways of working for about 10 years now. So far more junior, I guess, less experienced than many of the illustrious guests I know you've had on your podcast to date. But I do bring my own flavor and stance and style and energy to the agile equation, shall we say. And yeah, just for me, passionate about agile and the belief that it can be fun with the right mindset, bit of creativity and intent.
Great. I have to start with this question. I as I was saying, like before we started recording, like, I was just looking at, what type of questions or the discussions we want to have. And on your website, it says, ask me about a time I wrestled a penguin. So I just want to know about that before we dive into other stuff.
You're one of the first to ask, and I love that you've asked it. So I'm a firm believer, Milan, that all good stories start with the once upon a time. So social mind. All right, once upon a time, I was invited to go skiing in Bulgaria. Now, I'd never been skiing before in my life, so I thought I should go and practice. I should go onto an indoor slope and just see if I'm any good at it. And I tried it. I did a 2-hour lesson. And based on that 2-hour lesson, I learned, actually, I'm very good at it. So I bought some skiing gear and I brought my panda onesie with me. And for anyone unfamiliar with this, like a full bodysuit that I wore skiing in Bulgaria. Now, as one does when you're in a foreign country, we do this thing called après skiing, where you get very, very drunk the evening after skiing, and then you wake up the next morning and ski. So by the end of the week, I was very tired, and I decided to have enough skiing. I'm going to go back to the hotel, get in the hot tub, have a massage. So I leave this place. I'm dressed in my full panda gear. And on the way back to the hotel, I stop at a bar, our favorite pub, the Lion pub, because the guys behind the bar were teaching me phrases in Bulgarian, the naughtier ones. And as I walk into this bar, there was a big group of guys sat in the corner we usually sit in. And I looked at them, and I looked to their left, and I looked back at them. And they did the same. They looked at me, they looked to their left and back at me. And they had with them a guy on his bachelor party dressed as a penguin. A panda's just walked into a bar. The penguin is sat there alone. A bunch of drunken guys. Someone says, who would win a fight between a penguin and a panda? And of course, we had to wrestle right there in that bar, Milan. We had to do it. I couldn't allow the panda's honor to be besmirched. So we wrestled and we answered that fateful question that I'm sure many people have stayed up until the early hours of the morning, pondering, robbing them of sleep. Who would win a fight? Who is the most powerful monochromatic animal?
Yeah. That's awesome. You also, like, I was really not necessarily surprised, but it was like, just you've traveled a lot. You've been maybe like share some of these, like, your craziest adventures, and like, how have they shaped you? Like, even this experience in Bulgaria, I'm sure had some impact on you, but like, how have your experiences have shaped you, and how your perception or the way that you coach and look at life has been impacted by those experiences?
Oh, heavily. I love travel. I love adventures. I love visiting foreign lands and just the unknown that I can face as a consequence. I love meeting new people. I'm someone who can quite happily go off entirely on their own to a foreign country with minimal plans. I will book a holiday the day before I'm going, and I'll just turn up there spontaneously and then just do some stuff like go on a pub crawl with some strangers in Athens. I did last year. End up wrestling a penguin in a bar. I've been to India, and I've been to Dubai. I spent a month in Dubai last year. I've been to Bali and all over the US, and I'll just go to a place, just drive there and just meet whoever I meet. And I like leaving it open to the unknown, because I find if you go with others, you plan an itinerary and you have to compromise, and you say, oh, we're going to do that together, and you have to agree that. Whereas I can be like a magpie or I see something shiny and be like, oh, I'm going to go do that. And off I go and no one's stopping me. So it just leaves me open to new things and just meeting other cultures and having my own perceptions challenged and escaping my echo chamber. All of these things have helped with my confidence in approaching the unknown, in understanding the importance of diversity, with, you know, from having my perception challenged by those who think differently to me. And I welcome that so much. Those are the things that I think I bring back to the workplace alongside the stories, the anecdotes, the fun tales that I get to tell people.
I'm assuming it's also like, you know, empathy wise, like it's easier to understand with people. At least I find that like my experiences help me understand and see things to different perspectives. Like if I just well, at least I've always challenged myself to say, like, you know, yeah, this is how Milan sees things, but you know, there's just one way to look at things. And I think a lot of times I try to dive into experiences just to help me expose my blind spots and say, like, oh, you know, this is, you know, firm belief that I have, and I want to challenge that belief because I know it's probably not a holistic view. It's only, you know, what I see. So I don't know if you use it that way but that's what I found.
It's definitely one thing that it does help with. Obviously, there's this concept, Johari's window, where you can only perceive what you can perceive about yourself, and there are things, your blind spots, as you say, that others perceive about you that you aren't aware of. Exactly. So I've gone to these foreign countries. I had a great time in India during festival season, for example, and I saw the sheer number of people and how much effort and how they love their religion and their culture and things like that. And as a consequence, I saw that, and it inspired me to create some experiences, some retrospectives centered around non-traditional westernized themes. So a lot of the westernized themes are all, you know, start, stop, continue, and sailboats and all other things. And I said, right, let's do a Diwali theme retrospective, or let's do a Ramadan theme retrospective. Let's do things that matches their culture. And as a consequence of doing these things, it's allowed me to learn more about other people. And but also it's helped bring people from that part of the world out of their shell, because they then connect to the subject matter and are more engaged as a consequence in the ceremonies, the retrospectives or other meetings that you're partaking in.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. That's why I was going to ask you, like, you create a lot of content, you create, you know, retrospectives, you do the podcast, you have the blog, like you do a lot of stuff. What's the process? And I'm assuming, you know, there is some type of process, but like, how do you come up with these ideas? Is it just like in the trenches and just, hey, you know, I see this or that, or how do you come up with ideas, or what's your you know, source of inspiration for these ideas?
Do you know, it can be anything could inspire me. I might just be sat down one day and think, right, I want to create a new retrospective, and I might see something. I mean, watching a TV show and go, oh, that would be great. It might be there's something topical happening right now. So in the UK, we've just had the Platinum Jubilee, 70 years since Queen Elizabeth took the throne. And I thought, right, that would make a great retrospective. I'm going to create a Platinum Jubilee retrospective. I've done a Pride Month themed retrospective, which focuses on, you know, PRIDE as an acronym, spelling out some great things about celebrating diversity in that respect. To be honest, anything can inspire me, and I just go, oh, I'm going to do that. Then from there, it's a mixture of whether I enjoy creating it, whether I'll keep doing those things, because if I'm not going to be enjoying it, I probably won't do it as much. But equally the feedback I get from others. So when I share something and someone says to me, oh, we tried this with our team and it was so well received, that inspires me to keep doing it and creating more. So it's genuinely a combination of, has it inspired me to get my creative juices flowing? Have I enjoyed creating it? And then has it been well received? Has it provided value to us and others? And therefore I will create more. Now, inevitably, I've created things in the past that perhaps haven't landed as well, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's not an issue. Some things are a bit more niche and focused on a certain group. So if I create a meeting or an experience that's centered around a certain movie and only a certain few people have seen the movie, it's only going to resonate with them rather than the wider
audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, in the spirit of, like, you know, probably starts in your head. You're thinking like, hey, you know, I have a hypothesis that this would work, or hey, maybe it's just a fun idea. Let's test it out. And then whatever happens, you inspect and adapt based on that. How many how many I was trying to look at your website. There's no number, but how many retrospective templates
Do you know,
do you have, and
I
which ones
also,
are your favorite ones?
I also need to sit down and work that out now because I haven't actually counted for a long time. I think I do need to sit down and just, in fact, I'm probably going to create a list, just a list and say, right, that's number 7. I know it's over 70, I'm certain of that. And I want to release 100th one and celebrate that a little bit. But I began, I guess, diversifying away from just retrospective. So that was the origin, that was the genesis. I remember being a Scrum Master years ago and thinking, oh, I need to do another retrospective and I want to make it more engaging. And I was looking for inspiration and I came across the Elvis retro. I thought, oh, that's cool. And I saw that was the king of retrospectives. So I need to create the Queen. So I created the Queen rock band retrospective with the discography from Queen. So, Under Pressure, what's putting us under pressure as a team, or Don't Stop Me Now, what should we keep doing because it's going really well? And then from that, I created just that was my hypothesis. If I create more of these, they will result in better engagement for the people involved, better outcomes from the retrospective themselves, and people were loving them. And then I've increasingly been saying, right, rather than just retrospectives, what else can I bring a bit of creativity and energy and fun to? So I'm a big proponent of agile games as well. So I love creating and puzzling out new agile games. I remember sitting down and creating an agile themed escape room once upon a time that I ran when I was working with BP with a number of teams, and that had people locked in a room and they had to solve various agile puzzles to get out, each learning about the agile manifesto as they went. And as I said, I now diversify away from just retrospectives, and I think, right, how can I create a better experience for those I work with, whether that's involved in creating a sprint goal, whether it's involved in doing a retrospective, whether it's just a backlog refinement session, gamifying that a little bit. How can I turn it from being this stale, repetitive experience to something that people are energized and excited for?
Why? I mean, like, we talk a lot about gamifying things, but like, what are your thoughts on gamifying and like the importance of gamifying? Trainings, facilitation. What are your thoughts, especially in a virtual context?
Before we move on from that, you did ask me a moment ago what my favorite retrospective was. So I'm going to answer that quickly before it slips out of my mind. Yeah. My favorite one, I think, isn't actually one of my own creation. It's the hero's journey. And I like that. It's one of the first ones I remember grabbing and just running with and creating an experience from. So what I did is I remember grabbing this retro, and it's all about, right, who are the heroes of this last iteration? What are the tales? What kudos do we want to celebrate? Who was our mentor, our guide? Who helped us on the way? What is our dragon or our Darth Vader or our enemy that we're going to face? And what is the treasure at the end? What is the puzzle, or what is it we're going to gain from this experience? And I started by doing it, and I sent an email out saying, fellow adventurers, we're going to be doing a retrospective on this day. We're going to be exploring the journey of our iteration. So I've always loved that because I love telling a story, as I'm sure you've now gathered. So that would be my favorite retrospective to run.
And the first one you said was the Queen one.
That was one of my first creations, the Queen rock band retro. Yeah.
Nice. I still haven't gone through all of them, and I plan to check them out because there's a lot of good content. And maybe to stick on the content a little bit too, you develop podcasts and in a sense, and maybe we'll come back to the gamifying. I'm jumping. I tend to, my head is, but maybe let's just stay, and then we can talk about the podcast. So back to my previous question on gamifying things, and especially in a virtual context, what's your thinking on that, and how do you go about creating an environment, or thinking about how do you gamify things?
So I think I heavily leverage these days, get training from the back of the room, and the book and the learnings from that. So there is a concept within that called 4 C's, and I use that whenever I design any sort of training material. And I heavily leverage or heavily refer to the quote, which I think is often attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but maybe origins from Confucius, apparently. But it's basically, tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I'll remember, but involve me and I'll learn. So stemming from that, I have found whenever I'm being taught or whenever I'm teaching others, that if I'm involving them in the process, rather than just talking at them in this PowerPoint deck content style, they come away having learned something more, or having learned something better, and actually enjoying it also. So I basically, I think of a concept I want to teach. I apply my own learnings and how I learned it. And then I try and use that 4 C's to architect how I do it. And as an example, I might be that one of my favorite games to run, again, not one of my own creation, was Outcomes versus Outputs, Beautiful Summer Meadow. If anyone isn't familiar with this game, it's just a great way in 10 minutes to conceptualize and help people understand the difference between outcomes and outputs in specifications and briefs and requirements. So you get the people together and say, right, what is an outcome versus what is an output? So the first C, connections. What do they currently understand about the topic? We then get them to play, contextualize why it's important. Why do we need to learn about outcomes versus outputs? And we can talk about what they're building, creating, what products they're using and working with. And then concrete practice. So how can I turn it into a bit of a game so they can see it? So that game is all around getting people to draw to 2 different briefs. So one being an outcome focused one and one being an output focused one. And 99% of the time you play this game, people using the output focused brief will just get so bogged down in the detail that they will forget to draw the actual outcome. So we're trying to create a beautiful summer meadow, but you end up with cows in the sky and like lots and lots of little plants and flowers, all beautifully colored, but nothing resembling a meadow. And then at the end, you wrap up with conclusions. So what have we learned from this experience, but what could we importantly do differently back in the workplace? Exactly. So I'm a fan of gamification for that purpose. I believe, and I have learned and I've seen and been exposed to greater engagement from those involved and greater learnings as a consequence. Because I find if people are enjoying the experience, again, they're more likely to retain that.
What they learned, yeah. Yeah, I love 4Cs. I've used it, for a long time too, and it's especially like I remember designing a 5-day course for university that I was teaching Agile course, and it just helped me, like especially with 5 days, you don't know where you're gonna end up with time, and like you can put what you think you're gonna spend on each thing, but it's actually once you deliver the training, it's like, oh shoot, I need to spend more time here, or I spent way too much time on this, I need to cut it down. So I think that's another thing where not only is it good to think about how you diversify the content, especially for the practice, if you're going to use a game or something, but also just to help you, for those that are listening and want to deliver trainings. It's a very good simple template or canvas to actually think about how you're going to deliver the training. The designing the training is different from delivering the training, so you learn a lot.
Absolutely. But I think the other thing I try to do is mix up the medium. So I would like people to be not just consuming information, but participating in it. So learning from each other as much as possible, getting people up physically moving as much as you can. Obviously more difficult to recreate in a virtual environment, but not against the art of the possible. But those sorts of mixture of mediums I find help with knowledge retention as well, rather than just, here's your content, consume it, take it away, remember it.
Exactly. I find it like also virtually, it's easier for people to disengage. And we're so used to like, oh, this is not interesting, or this is not drawing my attention, and I'm just going to go do this and check on this. And I feel like, when you engage people, when it's interesting to them, they're more likely to get more, more value out of the training, because it's almost like a pull versus push. What else? What else do you when it comes to maybe like gamifying, and what are your favorite things besides you talk about meadows? What else would you maybe share with others that are working for you when it comes to creating content in that form?
So I think having feedback loops is hugely important, because you can be teaching a topic and just go off and focus on that, but unless you've got the feedback loop to allow people to influence the direction of play, you could spend a lot of time teaching something that isn't relevant. So a lot of the time when I create subject matter, I will actually go with more of here is a range, is almost a backlog of topics we could cover. Now these ones must be covered because they are absolutely essential, but everything else is down to you based on what the audience is looking for. And then you can empower them to decide what they most want to do. And often, again, there are some things that need to logically happen sequentially. So you might influence that somehow. but empowering them to decide which order you do things on based on what's going to keep their attention at a certain time, I find very much helps. So as an example, you might introduce your backlog of topics and say, right, there's this and this and this. This must be done. We're going to start with this because it's the only thing that's must be done first. But everything after that is down to you to decide. Now, this one is quite an energetic one. So it might make sense to do this straight after lunch when everyone's feeling that bit of a lull and allow them to decide that. And you can finish a topic and say, okay, what would you like to cover next? Based on how the energy levels are feeling and what people have learned from the previous one. So just building in those feedback loops, the ability to influence the direction of play, I find very much helps with, again, retention and keeping people connected.
And I think that goes by something that you just said that resonated with me. And I think a lot of times when I'm coaching, mentoring people, they shy away from that, like, just on the fly type of moment, like do what's like, I want to have certainty. I want to know, where I'm going to be. And I think like it's very difficult to do that. You put so much pressure on yourself by actually trying to control the environment and trying to like have, things like almost sequential. And I found it too, like that, where if I'm getting the feedback and I'm adjusting to where the class is going, what's happening, people tend to be a lot happier with the outcomes than if I have my own agenda and I'm trying to run through agenda. And I think, the more that you do something, the easier it is for you to adjust and, do things on the fly. I don't know if, maybe that's, your nature in the sense you've talked about how you like adventures. In a way, I'm more like, I'm fine with uncertainty and embracing uncertainty, but some people are not. So do you have maybe advice for people that want to have everything planned out when it comes to training, when it comes to facilitating versus actually inspecting and adapting on the fly?
So I think I'd come back to what you said there. It's quite pertinent. Your own wording was something along the lines of my agenda, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to teaching content, you are trying to allow others to learn, to absorb information, to be in a better place than they were before your involvement. Now, if you're focused too much on your own agenda, you'll have, I know that if I deliver all of this content in this specific order, it will be great for me. My experience will be great. But it's more important for their experience to be great. So I would try and just flip that mindset around, right? It's their agenda, and you are trying to help them learn in the best way they can learn. Now, in terms of getting comfortable with the unknown and the uncertainty, to be honest, just practice, just practice it. One of the things that I often do is if I'm facilitating a session, I will, lean coffee style. You can start off lean coffee and say, right, here is we could talk about anything today. What do you want to talk about? And empowering them to talk about that, or choose I do that so much in almost every session I've facilitated. There is always an element of it's your decision, it's your choice. So just practicing that sort of thing, operating on the fly based on what the participants want to see. You can always build in an overarching structure. I mentioned one earlier. You can say, right, here is a range of topics, and here is my recommendation based on what I know should happen in a certain order, but otherwise it's down to you. What would you like to do? So there is kind of overarching structure that you can put in place that can help you feel comfortable. But then other than that, it's just practice putting yourself into the unknown. I'll give you another example. I do, or have done in the past, these sessions called the Agile Arcade. And what that is I invite an audience to attend a session, and it's all using a Miro whiteboard. And on that day, I have put forth 6 potential Agile games that could be played. And I get them to grab their virtual coins and spend them like they're in a real arcade and move those onto the game they want to play. Now, at the start of that session, I have no idea which game will be played, but I need to be prepared to facilitate any of those games on the fly. So it's just that sort of thing, practicing putting yourself into a situation where you perhaps don't have all the answers.
Well, that's the thing. And like in my undergraduate, I double majored in computer information systems and communication. And I feel like, I got more out of the communication than I did in CIS. But like one of the things that I remember, and that's probably I've used anything more than anything else from college is one of my communication professors said that, public speaking, anything, is just more about, practice and like doing it enough times where you're comfortable with it and just practice. And I feel like that was the case, with trainings, that was the case with public speaking, that was the case just being okay with, messing things up, fucking things up, and just saying, okay, I've learned something from that. And one of the other things that he said that stuck with me is that people want you to succeed when you're presenting, so don't, nobody's saying, oh, I want to see Chris or Milan mess this up and look like an idiot. So like, everybody's kind of cheering for you to do a good job. So that's another maybe mental game or mental, something that people that are listening can think about. It's okay to mess up, and nobody's trying to.
This is a topic I'm such a fan of, is destigmatizing failure. Right, I talk about this a lot. I love the notion of sharing war stories and failure swap shops, because everything you see on LinkedIn is often, oh, there's this great success and I've done this and look at all these magical things that I've done. But so often, or so seldom, do we see, oh, this was awful, I fucked up today, this went really badly. Don't do it, guys. It doesn't work. So I love the notion of destigmatizing failure. My own podcast, the season 4 that I'm running at the moment, has a theme around destigmatizing failure. So I invite guests to share a failure of their own and tell what they learned from it. Because if you reframe a failure as a learning opportunity, it changes the game entirely. And I feel that the companies, the organizations, the people that embrace failure as, okay, we've learned from it, rather than it being this stigmatized thing, this negative, they fare far better than others.
Exactly. Maybe I want to talk to you about your podcast, and like, how did you get started with your podcast, and why did you start your podcast?
So it was something that I'd wanted to do for a while, and I'd been speaking with I guess a colleague in the Agile industry, Maloud Cicerelli, about creating this podcast. And we brainstormed it, we sat down for a while, and we had our idea. It was going to be a combination of kind of our own brand. So she runs a conference called Remote Forever, and I had the virtual Agile coaching. We were going to do virtually remote or remotely virtual or something to that effect. So we had an idea, and we'd started talking to the community about it and getting people to influence what we call it and what guests we'd want and all that sort of thing. And unfortunately, some personal circumstances got in the way that it meant that we didn't end up running that podcast. So I said, I'm just going to create one anyway. So I created one. And actually, I didn't even start with, I guess, a formal podcast in mind. I just quite simply reached out to Lisa Adkins and said, hey, it'd be great to interview you one day. And then that ends up happening. And I just kind of reverse engineered it back into a podcast from there. And then I started reaching out to other guests. So I think my second guest was Mike Cohen. And it just evolved from there. And then people started saying, oh, we like this, we'd like to see more. And then it just kind of evolved. And then it just kind of started to get its own identity a little bit. So I get every guest to add a new template to my backlog for retrospective. So Mike Cohen did Taco Tuesday, which is a bit of a fan favorite, and I've had some very weird ones suggested to me. Jeff Watts, I know he's been on your show as well, suggested a cowboy Western themed one. So it's a mixture of a bit of fun, but it's about all things agility, virtual working as well, which is another thing I'm a huge proponent of. And that's the genesis of the Virtually Agile podcast. Just kind of I always wanted to create one. Then I reached out to Lisa Adkins, and I think realistically at that point in time I had no business reaching out to Lisa Adkins. A podcast didn't exist yet. Why would she accept to be on my podcast? It makes no sense. But fair play to her. She arrived and she did a great job. It's great to have her on the show.
Yeah, it was awesome. You have some great guests, and like, what are you learning? I mean, like, reflecting back, what are you surprised about? What you're learning? Like, you keep doing it, same way I keep doing it. Like, what do you find rewarding and interesting about doing podcasts?
So there's a few things. One is I get these one-on-one conversations with established thought leaders, but equally people that I haven't really spoken to in an agile capacity much. So I'm not sure if you're aware that the theme of my show isn't necessarily just speaking to agile thought leaders. It's also about amplifying newer voices. So you're probably aware, like most conferences these days, we see the same voices over and over, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't necessarily promote equality, diversity, and otherwise. So my show has in each season 8 episodes, 4 of which are from more established voices, the people you would see at conferences, and 4 of which are probably people you've never heard of before. And so that in itself, enables me to have these great agile conversations. And that's what I call them. They're not interviews, they're just conversations between two agile folk about all manner of topics. So my perceptions get challenged from that perspective. I learn about what others are doing. But then equally, these newer voices who I haven't heard of before, I get to help amplify their voice, get them out on in the wider agile landscape. So yeah, big fan of that.
Yeah, and it's like I also find like I'm validating, certain things that I want to ask these people just to say like, hey, am I thinking about this right? Or maybe, is there something that I'm not thinking about? So I find that also interesting, and it's that learning, I think, that it also draws me. So everything you said, I think I find similarity and common thread in those, and but that's also maybe to encourage others to create more podcasts. It's just start doing it, right, and see where it evolves. Like I started mine like that too, and it's just whatever evolves, and try it out, because I think we'll try different things. Think about things that it's it might be something else, and it's
that would be my encouragement to anyone who's thinking about creating their own podcast, or I don't know, running an event featuring someone from a conference. Just reach out to them, because so often they're more than happy to be involved. There's no stigma to it. Just reach out, offer the conversation. They can say no, fine. I've had people say, I've got too much on right now, or I've had some people tell me, what, I've done a few podcasts and I just don't enjoy the experience. I said, that's okay. I understand, exactly. No problem. They can only say no if you reach out and ask them. They can only say no. But yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's that learning, at least, and it's different ways to learn, but that desire to learn. Another thing that I really like that you do is that you open source everything, and you said that that's important to you. Could you maybe talk about why do you believe in that, and
yeah, so
why is it important?
I've seen and observed, and I've been requested to do a lot of things with the content I've created, right? I've had people say, we'd love to get this exclusively on our app, or we'd like to feature it on our service or our website, and it always involves some element of it being behind a paywall and people not being able to access it unless they pay a premium of some kind. And I've observed there seems to be a lot of, hey, I've created something, and now it's going to be a new framework, and then there's going to be an academy, and then there's going to be a training course, and so on and so forth out there in the wider agile industry. And I'm a firm believer that actually it's a bit of a certification circus out there, right? There, if you were to look at, I know SAFe is the easy target these days, but if you were to look at all the SAFe certifications and collect all of them like you were a Pokemon master, you'd end up with, I don't know, a name resembling Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, because you'd have all these little letters after your name. And I'm a firm believer that we don't need more certifications and frameworks and things like that. What we probably need is more empathy and sharing and networking and understanding and helping other people. So all of my creations, one, I enjoy creating them. They're great for my own mental health, and they get my creative outlet going. But two, the stories I get back from people saying how they've used them and how they appreciate them is all I've needed. So I don't put anything behind a paywall. If you go onto my website and try and access any of my templates, you don't even have to put in an email address or subscribe. Like there'll be a pop-up after 10 seconds saying, hey, would you like to stay connected? Great. But there's no requirement to do anything to get access to anything I create. And that's just a fundamental principle of my own, open source always. Now, the only exception to that is if I'm doing some paid consultancy work for a company, like I'm helping a company to do something, then that's a separate matter, because I've got to live, right? But if I'm creating something, I want people to be able to access it, use it, and benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think it is a belief, mindset, whatever you want to call it, but it's something I've done too, where it's like, and I've had thoughts about like, just how privileged some people are to have access to some of this stuff. And it's also like, if you truly want to, if you stand behind about helping people, like creating these products, or these monetizing on some of the stuff that we do is tough. And like I teach, for instance, CSM, I teach the Scrum Alliance, and part of me, always says, like, yes, I'm doing this, for to pay my family's, bills and stuff like that. But like you said, I think the certifications and all of this is just a big uh, big mistake that I think we've done as a community. And in one part, it's a good thing because it's creating a lot of awareness, because there's a pull. Like a lot of people just want this. There's a certification, but at the same time, what I've heard you saying, you kind of alluded to it now, is I wish that the next 10 years will be more about how do we contextualize things and not how do we sell frameworks and certifications. Because if we look at the last 10, 15, 20 years, that hasn't worked. Look how many people have certifications, and we're still dealing with same type of issues in organizations. So not necessarily that everything, that there's, things wrong with certifications. If that's helping you learn, that's great. But I feel like with frameworks, with certifications, we've taken it overboard, where we've lost the what is the outcome. We've focused on the outputs, and I really appreciate that you are promoting that. I'm trying to do more that as well, where how do we help each other, and how do we look at not just monetizing everything, but truly making an impact.
And often my starting point is, what would I have liked to have known when I was facing this for the first time? So the retros began in the same ways. Like, I was looking for a new retrospective. I wasn't seeing many available. Wouldn't I have loved to have had a resource like I've created now, where there's just, with a few clicks of a button, I can access a retro and then plug and play it into whatever tool I'm using and run it with my team, rather than having to spend hours preparing ahead of time, et cetera, et cetera. So often my starting point is, what would have been valuable to me when I face this, and therefore how could that benefit others in the future?
Exactly. So good job. Keep doing that. I think that, and also I think it's a good message to others. Like, how can you help others deal with the challenges, similar challenges that they might be facing, and without monetizing on it. Another thing that stood out to me, I wanted to talk to you about, is you said any meetings I facilitate will likely be shorter than 45 minutes. Could you talk about why that is? And maybe not sticking to 45, but just the idea here is to keep them short, right? But
yeah. So I got this thing in my mind which says anything longer than 45 minutes is a workshop, not a meeting. So I start with that as a mindset. And you touched upon it earlier, right? We said when we're teaching things, when we're facilitating, people's minds begin to be distracted. Our attention span, according to recent Microsoft surveys, is now measured in seconds, not minutes, right? So if our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and we're having these long meetings, you and I know what happens. Towards the end of that meeting, our mind is already on the next meeting or something else, or you're tired, or you've got emails to respond to, or Slack messages, or whatever it may be. Our attention spans are slipping, and therefore the end of that meeting is going to be of less value to the collective group. So starting with a mindset of, if I can shorten things to 45 minutes, that being a longer than seconds itself, how can I create the most valuable experience within that time frame as possible? Noting that my own attention span definitely does not last longer than 45 minutes. I've been in these long hours and hours and hours of workshops, and they can be useful once upon a time, as long as you've got the right breaks built in. So that's where it starts from, trying to keep people engaged and enjoying the experience, rather than it being something where the latter part of that meeting is not providing the value it should, because people's attentions have slipped.
Yeah. What is your process like, or maybe what tips do you have? I think, facilitation is one of those things that I always get questions that people want to know more about. Like, what tips would you share? Like, what's your process with facilitating? Anything that you think would be worth sharing with the audience as far as like being a better facilitator?
So the very starting point begins with having a clear outcome that you want from the meeting. And usually that's condensed into an agenda of some kind. So let's say you and I are going to create an agenda or facilitate a great session next week. Starting point is, what do we want to get from that session? What is the outcome from it? And then let's get that into some form of agenda, so people know what's happening ahead of time and can prepare accordingly. All right. I even go to the point nowadays where if I'm sent a meeting without an agenda, I will decline, because otherwise you know what will happen. You end up turning up to a meeting and you don't know what it's about, and it's a very loose agenda, or people will put in a meeting that just says catch up and there's no context whatsoever. that's not going to help anyone make a valuable use of that time, given, especially when you've got so many meetings to attend throughout a day. Obviously, the pandemic has somewhat exacerbated that because we can't grab each other face to face. Now, so starting point is absolutely clear outcome in mind, get an agenda in place, ensure everyone understands that agenda, and invite, get a bit of a feedback loop. Is anything missing, etc., etc. I always aim for the beginning of any session I facilitate to include some sort of icebreaker exercise, something non-work focused, because I love focusing on the human interaction, the human element of the fact that we're not just here to be avatars behind a screen. We are people, and hence why I've got very much a motto of mine is people first, guardians of agility. So facilitate things, clear outcome, clear agenda, ensure that it's understood, and invite people to partake in that agenda, add, remove as accordingly. Begin with a bit of an icebreaker, get people talking about things. And then other than that, it's trying to build in the interactivity. So not just presenting content at people, but building it in a way that allows people to interact. So I mentioned earlier, a lot of my facilitation is what are we going to do about this problem, and just allow that silent brainstorming first, so that you do allow people the ability to share their own voice rather than a single dominant voice taking over the conversation. Allow everyone to get their thoughts down. Then I invite people to prioritize the most important thing to move forwards with, and then obviously try and move forwards with a consensus or an agreed method to move forwards as a group.
Any techniques on how to keep people focused on the agenda? Because a lot of times, things can go off the tracks or just off the topic. Any things that you do to kind of keep them focused on the outcome?
I'm going to share the answer with a visual
Elmo?
representation. Elmo, you know what this stands for?
Yeah, enough. Let's move on.
Yeah. So Elmo's a very easy one, right? You hear, observe, or see people going a little bit off topic, just ensuring that everyone understands that Elmo, or if everyone shows that, or whatever visual cue or audible cue you're going to use, that means, hey, we're drifting off a little bit. Let's move back on track. So that's a very common one I use. And again, you can build that into your team agreements, whatever mechanism you have to ensure everyone knows how you work with one another. Because it's great having these side conversations, etc. But the problem I always come back to is, let's say, 5 minutes of a conversation or 5 minutes of a 30-minute meeting are taken up by a topic that doesn't involve the rest of the group. That's 5 times that many people not adding value or having their time wasted. So I'm always thinking of that as a mindset, right? How much value is being added to this group? The other thing that I absolutely always aim to do, in the same way I'm a huge fan of continuous improvement and retrospection, is to build in a return on time invested loop into every meeting I do. So whether it's a fist of 5, whether it's some other methods, just allowing people the ability to say, right, was this a good use of time? And if it wasn't, what could be different? How could we improve it? And therefore, we're kind of doing this micro retrospection, this continuous improvement of actually how the meetings are being run themselves. Because often, and I'm sure you face this, meetings end up becoming this furniture style thing that they just kind of exist, and they're the same, and they're not reflected upon or changed, and they just become the way we do things. And then, as I said earlier, the same equation applies. X number of people times X number of minutes of value not being added doesn't prove valuable.
Well, and a lot of times we're just running from meeting to meeting. It's not even like, having time to digest, but at least, digest, like, will we just, talk about what are the actual outcomes, and it's just like running from one meeting to another, but just inspecting, like, building that in and saying, hey, what can we do to make these better? What can we do to eliminate this meeting? Is there really a need for this? And I think especially in remote environment, that is even harder, because it's just like, you don't have the opportunity to have those conversations after the meeting, or just to there's usually those couple of minutes or 5-10 minutes that you might be able to catch up. From your perspective, what is the hardest part about working remotely? You've been pushing, or not just you, I think maybe to put it, you like working remotely. What is the hardest part? You've even liked it before, you've started doing this before the COVID pandemic. So what do you think is what are some challenges? What is the hardest part about working remotely?
I think it depends on your circumstance, right? So I'm fortunate in that I have a separate office space. Okay. And if I close that door at the end of the day, it's almost like me closing the time on work and saying, right, everything I do outside of this room is my personal life. Now I'm aware some people don't have that luxury. Some people are working in shared housing, or they might be working from their bedroom or their living room or their kitchen table. And therefore the switch off between work and their home life becomes blurred. And I know that can be very, very challenging. It can definitely be isolating. Not seeing people on a day-to-day basis in the same way you used to, that can be very much a challenge. But I think the biggest thing for me is that the whole remote, virtual, whatever you want to call it, situation, it is truly dependent on the individual and what their needs are. So I think there was very much a push, or has been a push, to apply this kind of one-size-fits-all approach, right? Everyone must be in X number of days a week for us to be successful. We need to create that culture that supposedly only ever happens around a water cooler. But the challenge is people have different needs and different circumstances and different preferences. And I firmly believe that the companies and organizations that embrace true flexibility with regards to working from anywhere, not just from home, are going to be the ones to benefit. Because as you said, it could be that you are quite introverted, and actually it's very mentally draining for you to be in a physical office where there's loudness and voices here, there, and everywhere. And actually to focus on work is very difficult for you in that circumstance. Exactly. It could be you're the opposite, and you get your energy from speaking to people, and you need and crave that. So you want to be in an office, but then people aren't there. And it could be you get to that office at the end of, after your hours of commuting, and people haven't turned up anyway. So you're just dialing in via the same device to interact people across the world. So it just doesn't necessarily make sense. So I think the companies that provide the true flexibility for people to deliver the outcomes in the way they are best able to deliver those outcomes based on their preferences are going to be the ones that benefit the most. And they're going to have happier people that will stay with those companies more than the others.
Yeah, and like I've been thinking, I just went to the global gathering in Denver, and there is something about relationships. There is something about trust. I don't know if it has to do with drinking or whatever it is, but there is that. Like I tell people, some of the best retrospectives that I've done happened at the bar. When it comes to trust, what have you seen? How do you help teams develop trust in a virtual environment? What are some of the tips maybe that you want to share?
So I was just going to, before we do that, I was going to reflect on what you said there about trust and building it face to face. I do believe it can be quicker to build trust in person, right? There is a tangibility about being able to walk up to someone, shake their hand, and feel that physical interaction, and think of them as a person, and know them, and to trust them more, because they become this physical entity, as opposed to just being a name on a screen that you haven't met face to face, right? So I do believe that can be easier, quicker to establish in person sometimes. But then equally, on the flip side, you could establish a relationship very well virtually, having never met a person. I've met virtually met some great people I have a great relationship with, never met them in person, hasn't stopped me establishing or building a great relationship with them.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I agree. I think it is harder to do it. You have to have people wanting to develop that relationship. Just in there, we're joking because some people, like, for the last 2 years, we met virtually, and I was talking in one group, like, I don't know if I've seen you before, or we met in person, or we're actually just interacted virtually. And one of the guys said, "Stand up." And we stand up. He's like, "We definitely didn't meet in person. It's been virtual." So that was fun. I don't know, how much truth or whatever it is, but like just standing up there and looking somebody in the eye and seeing like just the whole dynamic is like, oh, maybe we didn't meet in person, or we never spoke, even though we may have. But it is interesting. I think, I personally feel like I want to do more remote going forward. I want to have options. I want to work from where I want to work. And I think that's the reality going forward. I think the tools will probably get better. That can improve how we collaborate and communicate. But I think it's here to stay. So
yeah, I honestly can't see it going anywhere, particularly as we've got current I guess, gas, oil prices rising and rising, the environmental damage from commuting versus what you can do virtually. There's huge benefits there by reducing the amount you commute. It would just mean a need to change where we do our business, and to ensure that those businesses, those industries that are dependent upon commuter travel are pivoted in a way that supports life evolves, business evolves.
Yeah, and it seems like people are happier too. Like I think, when you talk to people, they reflect back on the pace of work and how much that they just don't want to go back to that. It's just it's unfulfilling and it's exhausting. And I think, for me too, like it's nice to be back in Europe, spending more time with my family and doing the training, even though it might be for the, let's just say, US market, it's, 4 p.m. to midnight. It still gives me options. I choose to do that. And when I come back to the United States, I'm still re-engaged, same way re-engaging. And it's just, I personally feel happier and more fulfilled being able to do that. So we'll see what happens, but I think there is something about it that is more humane in a sense of how we work and collaborate.
The absolute biggest thing for me has been the removal of the commute. Right, so that commute time for me was often dead time. Right, it was unproductive, and if I travel into London hypothetically now, it's a 3-hour minimum round trip commute. So 3 hours of my day I spend traveling to an office to do the same thing I could do from my home office. And that time, I could maybe listen to a podcast or read a book or something like that. But without that commute, I could be doing something more productive. I could go out for a walk with my morning, listen to the podcast while out on a walk. I could get some exercise. I could see family. I could see friends. There's just so much I could do with that time that becomes my own time rather than time that I'm using to get to a physical destination. So that's been the hugest thing for me. And if there was a machine that enabled me to press a button and I was in an office, far different equation, right? I'd be more than happy to be there. But we don't have that reality.
Yeah, exactly. And it's when you just look at the pros and cons, I think I personally, and it seems like a lot of people do, but there was also, maybe it's not just one size fits all. I think for some work, it's probably better to be in person. I think, especially when you're starting up teams and like getting people to spend a little bit more time at the beginning together, it's going to, amplify that learning and trust, and then, allowing people to decide what works best for them.
Yeah, my feeling is it's going to become a collaborate work office. The office is going to be a collaboration space where you might visit on a monthly basis to do a bit of team building, get everyone together, bounce ideas off of one another. But the actual work, the day-to-day work, should be done from wherever people are feeling most productive.
Yeah. I agree. We got 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask maybe a couple of last questions. Mindfulness. I know I've heard you talk about mindfulness. It's so important, I think, in my opinion, for coaches, for team members. How do you practice mindfulness? What are your thoughts about, helping teams as a facilitator, coach, build that into that maybe team agreement, or just, what's important to the team?
Yeah, so definitely a topic that I'm a believer in. When it comes to obviously being a big believer in continuous improvement and retrospectives in particular, I would feel uncomfortable professing to teams, hey, you've got to do your retrospectives if I wasn't myself reflecting on my own feelings, thoughts, behaviors, performance. So I practice what I call solospection. So I will journal. I will sit down and just note, how am I feeling? What's been going well? Where have I added value? Where I haven't added value? Where could I be better? So I'm always building in retrospective behaviors into the very DNA of how I live my day-to-day basis. I go to a therapist, so I speak to someone about how I'm feeling in that respect as well. And then for me, demonstrating that I'm doing those behaviors myself makes it easier for me to say, hey, we should be reflecting and retrospecting as a team.
Yeah. So, yeah, I journal, like I do similar stuff where I journal, like, what I'm doing, and then I try to reflect. I even go through the notebook that I have, and like, it's nice to go back and just reflect. And then I don't know if you're familiar with like Wheel of Change. what I want to drop. I do that like quarterly too. Like, what do I want to stop doing? What do I want to, I just recently went to the one and I was like, do I still want to keep doing the podcast? Because like one of the things that, the reason that I started doing podcasts is I stopped writing. And I'm like, I want to do this. And now I'm thinking like, I really enjoy writing, but I have to prioritize. So it's really just, taking a time to pause and reflect and see what's important, and asking others for feedback. I think another thing that, being mindful is, you talked about your hiring window, is like, there is the unknown, meaning that, I just have to dive into and get the experience, or just, but there's also asking others to see how they see, and, what they might share, that might be a blind spot for you. Great.
So
well,
I think
thank you. What would be
the same thing with a team, right? You can have a coaching contract or a coaching agreement saying, this is how we're going to work together, and these are things that you would like some support on, and these are things that you're happy with, and so on and so forth. But also, this is the frequency that we are going to collectively review. Is this still working for us? Where could we be better? So inviting that feedback, I think, with your team can absolutely be very powerful.
Exactly. And that reminds me, I was working in one team and I encouraged them, where they came up with this idea of pairing, like same way they, and pairing, like in talking about, just every month they would just pair and they would share kind of what they're doing, what they, and that was really helpful in a sense that it forced them to talk to each other and expose kind of like how they want to improve personally. And it also helped with trust, because when they started sharing the stuff, they became more vulnerable with each other, and they were exposing things that probably otherwise they wouldn't. So that's another thing that kind of helps.
Yeah, I mean, demonstrating vulnerability is so important. You talked about it earlier, when we were talking about putting yourself out there and speaking on a podcast or speaking at an event. People don't want you to fail. And actually, when it came to my very first one, I reached out to a meetup and I said, hey, I'd love to speak about the Agile Manifesto and the fact that I believe it needs to be updated. And my very first line was, by the way, never done this before, just vulnerable, never done this before. It might go awfully, bear with me. Unfortunately, it was great. Everyone is supportive of you. So I find, as a leader, being one of the first to demonstrate vulnerability and saying, hey, don't know the answers, but we are going to collectively find them together.
Exactly. Great. I know we're out of time. I don't know if you have anything else, but maybe just, you said you're always looking for a next adventure. So what are you, is there something that's coming up? Is there anything that you want to share that you might think might be your next adventure or idea?
So my next physical adventure, I have something like 12 days of work off coming up in the next 3 weeks or so, I think. So I'm going to just go on a jaunt somewhere. I haven't decided where yet. Somewhere in Europe, I imagine. I might just jump in my car, drive, and see where my car takes me. My next intellectual adventure, I'm writing a book on continuous improvements and retrospectives in particular. So it will feature some of my top tips and strategies, flim-flams, gambits, and otherwise, for how to enable continuous improvement, heavily focusing on retrospection, of course. It's where my bread and butter lies. So yeah, look out for that.
That's awesome. Yeah. And definitely, maybe we can talk some other time about the content as well as the process for writing the book. I've talked to other people that have written, and it isn't interesting. Everybody has this, a different way, but it's also in a way a similar process for many. And that's another thing that I would encourage others: just start writing. And somebody said, I think it was Jeff got at the conference, like, just start writing, like, just who cares, just whatever it is, for an hour or so a day, or even 15 minutes. What would you like to leave us with? I'll put in your website and link to your website in the description, but what would you like to share with?
The only thing I would like to leave people with is just to think about how they can share more with the community. So if you create something that you think's cool, might benefit others, just share it. Like there's a guy called Carl Adamson who introduced me to the phrase where he said, if you aren't a little bit embarrassed by the first version of your release of something, you've released it too late. So even if it's imperfect, just share something. It'll probably be helpful to someone, and then we can create and foster this community that I love being part of.